For years, you've heard that Iran was an invincible military power, that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was the elite of the elites. Fanatical soldiers who would die for the regime without hesitation. The same ones who, for decades, pointed missiles at Israel, threatened to block the world's largest oil corridor, and vowed to destroy the West. You heard that. The whole world heard it. But it was a lie, and the first to reveal that lie were not American intelligence, it wasn't Israel, it was the Revolutionary Guard soldiers themselves. Because today they are fleeing to Afghanistan in disguise with fake passports, crossing the border in hiding, like common criminals. Think about that for a second. They preferred Afghanistan, one of the most dangerous and miserable countries on the planet, rather than continue fighting for the regime they swore to defend to the death. This isn't normal desertion, this is a collapse. In this video, you'll understand exactly what's happening and what was so brutal that made the military elite of a 40-year-old regime choose Afghanistan as their way out. But I'll tell you one thing, this video isn't just about Iran. It's about what happens when anyone or any country mistakes someone else's silence for weakness. Keep that idea in mind, it'll make a lot of sense in the end. To understand the scale of what's happening, you need to know who the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is. They're not a regular army. Created right after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the Revolutionary Guard was built with a very specific mission: to protect the regime. Not the country, the regime. It's as if you created an army, a parallel force within your own country, made up of the people most fanatical and loyal to the supreme leader. Trained to kill, trained to die, and most importantly, trained to never question. They control part of the Iranian economy, fund armed groups in other countries, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Palestine, and operate drones, ballistic missiles, and espionage networks. They are the armed branches of the regime, both inside and outside Iran. For decades, the Western world has treated the Revolutionary Guard as one of the most dangerous military organizations in the Middle East. The United States has officially designated it as a terrorist organization. These are the men who are now crossing the border into Afghanistan with fake passports. But to understand how these men got to this point, you need to go back a few months. Because the collapse didn't start at the border with Afghanistan, it started in a meeting room, and what happened there was the trigger for everything. For months, the United States and Iran tried to reach a nuclear agreement. The talks took place in Oman and Geneva, with representatives from the Omani government acting as messengers between the two sides. Since the United States and Iran do not speak directly, the American Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and advisor Jared Kushner represented the United States. On the Iranian side, the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi led the group. The Americans put a proposal on the table, and it was a generous proposal. The United States said, "We'll give you ready, enriched nuclear fuel, enough to sustain your entire energy network for 10 years, completely free of charge. The only condition is that you stop enriching uranium within your territory. It's that simple. You continue with your nuclear energy, but you don't enrich anymore." Think about what this proposal meant. If the Iranian nuclear program was really peaceful, as the regime has always claimed before the United Nations and the whole world, this would be the perfect solution. Guaranteed energy, no sanctions, no conflict. But Iran refused, and it didn't refuse politely. Araghchi said that Iran had the absolute right to produce its own uranium within its territory and did not give it up. At that moment, the Americans understood what was really happening. If you refuse free fuel, it becomes very clear that what you want is not the fuel, you want the production process. The only reason you would want the process instead of the result is that the ultimate goal is not electricity, it's a bomb. But then came the scariest part. During the negotiations themselves, the Iranian representatives revealed something that left the Americans speechless. Iran admitted that it possessed approximately 10,000 kilograms of processed uranium. Out of this total, about 1,000 kilograms were in a stronger version called 20%, and 460 kilograms were in an even more powerful version called 60%. Just so you have an idea, making a nuclear bomb requires uranium processed to 90%. At 60%, you're already very close. It's like being on the top floor, just before the top. And the Iranians not only admitted this, they bragged about it. Witkoff revealed in an interview after the attack that the Iranian negotiators themselves told him, with pride, that that stockpile was enough to produce 11 nuclear bombs. 11. At a peace negotiation table, Witkoff said that they showed no shame. On the contrary, they seemed proud to have deceived the international inspectors from the United Nations, who were supposed to control this kind of material, not as a warning, as a threat.
460 of uranium enriched to 60%, plus 1,000 kilos of uranium enriched to 20%, and the remainder is at 3.67. They make their own centrifuges to enrich this material, so there's practically no way to stop them. They have an endless supply of it.
At that moment, the American team understood that there was nothing left to negotiate. The talks turned into a contest of intimidation. In a particularly tense session, Arrogance raised his voice at Witkoff and started shouting. Witkoff stood up and said he could just walk away if that's how Iran wanted to handle things. But the damage was already done. The United States had the confirmation they needed. Iran was using the negotiations as theater, buying time, finishing its program. The decision was made. Now think about that for a second. Iran just admitted it has material for 11 bombs. He yelled at the American diplomat, even refused free fuel. If you were the president of the United States at that moment, what would you do? Do you impose a sanction? Call a meeting at the United Nations? Negotiate more? The response from the United States was one that the world did not expect. And here comes the question that will define everything in this video. What does a country do when it realizes it's negotiating with someone who never intended to give in, who was just buying time while building 11 bombs? Because what the United States did next wasn't to send a diplomatic note, it wasn't to impose more sanctions, it wasn't to call an emergency meeting at the United Nations. What came next was something no one expected, and that Iran itself never believed would happen. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military operation against Iran. On the American side, the operation was named Operation Epic Fury. Epic Fury. On the Israeli side, Roaring Lion. All branches of the American Armed Forces participated: Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Space Force, and the reserve troops. All together, integrated with the Israeli forces on a scale not seen in modern history. American intelligence had monitored the movements of the Iranian regime's leadership for months. They knew where they would be, when, and how. One morning, 49 leaders of the Iranian regime gathered for breakfast. Imagine the scene. The most powerful men in Iran. Generals, commanders, advisors to the supreme leader sitting in a room, talking about the war that was coming, feeling like they were protected. They chose the morning based on military logic. In the morning, the winds are less favorable for air attacks, and the sun impairs the pilot's vision. It was, in theory, the safest time to meet, but American intelligence knew that too. They knew about the timing. They knew about the location. They knew who would be sitting and in which chair. The Americans knew exactly where Iran's most protected leaders would be. The time, the place, the names. This isn't luck. This is years of intelligence infiltration into the heart of the regime. The missiles arrived before anyone could react. 49 leaders killed in a single operation. The Iranian regime's leadership was eliminated in minutes, and along with them, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, the man who controlled the country for decades, the most powerful figure in the regime, dead. President Trump, when commenting about Khamenei days later, was direct. I got to him before he got to me. They tried twice, but I got there first. A direct reference to the assassination attempts against Trump himself during the 2024 election campaign, attributed to Iranian agents. When the news was confirmed, the world was in shock, but inside Iran, the shock was on another level. The Iranian regime tried to respond. Less than 2 hours after the first attacks, Iran fired missiles at American bases in the region and at Israeli targets. The foreign minister appeared in live interviews saying that nothing had changed, that the military capability was intact, and that new commanders were already in position. But the numbers told a completely different story. In the following days, the count of dead commanders kept rising. The command system of the Revolutionary Guard had been destroyed precisely and relentlessly. American intelligence knew who the leaders were, knew where they were, knew when they met, and eliminated them one by one. General Dan Kane, the top commander of the American Armed Forces, said that the operation was the result of months and, in some cases, years of careful planning. It wasn't an impulsive attack, it was the result of extraordinary intelligence work. And that's when the Revolutionary Guard started to crack from within. Because it's one thing to lose a battle. Armies lose battles and move on. But what was happening inside the Revolutionary Guard wasn't just a military defeat. It was something much deeper. It was the breaking of faith. Soldiers of the Revolutionary Guard started to flee. Not silently, not in an organized way, but chaotically, desperately, each one trying to save their own skin however they could. Videos started circulating on social media showing members of the Revolutionary Guard in the Iran-Afghanistan border regions. Imagine soldiers trained for war wearing civilian clothes over their uniforms, carrying simple bags, showing documents with names that aren't theirs, crossing the border in line along with ordinary civilians, trying not to draw attention, afraid, not knowing what comes next. Afghanistan, a country ruled by the Taliban, without basic infrastructure, without security, devastated by decades of war, one of the hardest places on the planet to live. And they chose Afghanistan. That detail says everything about the morale and psychological state of the Revolutionary Guard at that moment. But it wasn't just the ordinary soldiers. Field commanders and high-ranking officers began to threaten something even more serious: publicly abandoning the regime. According to intelligence sources, a group of commanders sent a clear message to the remaining leadership. Either the regime finds a political solution, or they will appear in public and announce that they are on the other side. And if the commanders openly turn their backs, what's left of the Revolutionary Guard will collapse within hours. The Iranian foreign minister himself, in a live interview, ended up admitting the obvious. When the journalist asked how many commanders had been killed in the first minutes of the attacks, the answer was, "We lost some commanders." "That's a fact," he tried to downplay right after, saying that the military capability remained intact. But the fact had already been stated. And the world heard. Trump in turn made a direct and public offer to members of the Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and the Iranian police. He said, "Lay down your arms now, and you will have full immunity or face certain death."
Today I say that you must lay down your arms and have complete immunity, or the other option will be to face certain death.
Full immunity. An unprecedented offer to the military of an enemy regime. But there was a real problem. There were no American troops on the ground to receive the defectors. The organized opposition within Iran had been destroyed by the regime over the years, with leaders imprisoned, executed, or forced into exile. There was no resistance structure for the defectors to run to. That's why many went to the only place they could reach, the border with Afghanistan. With Khamenei dead and the top leadership eliminated, Iran was left without clear leadership. The man who took control was Ali Larijani, former Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, and now the one responsible for what was left of the security group that governs the country. He is trying to hold together what's left of the regime. Publicly, Larijani maintains a stance of resistance. A social media account attributed to him stated that Iran will not negotiate with the United States. But at the same time, the Wall Street Journal revealed that Larijani himself sought contact with the Americans through intermediaries in Oman to reopen dialogue. In public, he calls for resistance. In private, he asks for help. Trump confirmed that talks were being considered, but made a point of reminding the world about Iran's situation. He said, "Most of the people we were negotiating with no longer exist. They're dead." The number 2 and number 3 also died. They should have closed the deal earlier. They waited too long. Iran also made it clear that it was willing to give up things that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. Recognize the United States as a legitimate country, abandon the stated goal of destroying Israel, and loosen the strict laws that have suffocated the Iranian population for decades. But Trump showed no hurry, and while the negotiations are not moving forward, the regime continues to bleed from within. And there's a detail in this story that most people haven't noticed yet, and it's perhaps the clearest sign that the regime already knows it has lost. Think carefully about what happened in this whole sequence. Iran went to the negotiating table and, instead of negotiating, decided to intimidate, revealed the arsenal. It bragged about the 11 bombs, shouted at the American diplomat, and thought it was in a position of strength. But it was exactly that arrogance that sealed the fate of the regime. Because by revealing the size of the nuclear program, Iran handed the Americans the perfect justification to act. By shouting and refusing any agreement, it closed the last diplomatic door. By feeling invincible, it let its guard down at the wrong moment. This has a name: arrogance. When one side feels so powerful, it starts making mistakes that a weaker opponent would never make. And in history, arrogance has brought down empires much greater than Iran. The regime wasn't destroyed just by American missiles. It was destroyed by its own certainty that it was invincible. Now, I want to ask you a simple question, and I really want to read your answer in the comments. Do you believe the Iranian regime will still survive this conflict, or is this the final collapse? Write it down below. There's no right answer. I want to know what you think. If this video helped you understand what's happening in the world, Share it with someone who also wants to understand. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now. We cover these topics every week, straight to the point. See you next time.